Well, good afternoon. I'm glad you joined us today. I'm Jim Pence with See the Light, and we are today going to continue working on the tulip that we started last week. Now, if you weren't with us last week, you can still find that tulip video on our Facebook page. So you can go watch the replay because last week we did a basic sketch that we started out with a rough sketch and then we refined it a little bit. Well, today we're going to take that one step further and we're going to begin to color our tulip. Now, we're all probably using different media, and that's a good thing because uh, you don't have to use exactly what I'm using. Art is very fluid, and what I want you to do is to find what works best for you. So you might be working with colored pencils, you might be working with pastels, soft pastels or chalk pastels, as they're sometimes called. You might be working with watercolor, might be working with oil pastels or acrylics or whatever. So whatever I do, you're going to have to adapt and adjust to whatever medium you're working with, unless, of course, you're using digital media like I am. I'm working with ArtRage, and I highly recommend it. It's a great and pretty inexpensive digital program if you want to work with digital media. I am going to talk you through this process. We've got several things here. I've got my references, my reference photos. So I'm going to put those kind of down here because I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. You see, I've got my samples here. Samples are little swatches of color that I've already picked out, and I've actually picked these out right from the photo. Now, again, if you're working with colored pencils or whatever media, you're going to just try to find or mix colors that are close to what we're working with, or what again, what you want to paint. Remember, you don't have to make your tulip look exactly like this one. If you don't like yellow, you might want to try pink or red or white, or maybe a mix of colors. Be creative, do whatever you really want to do. But for this, I'm going to try to stay somewhat close to the photo. So I have picked some colors. The way I do that digitally is I come over here to my eyedropper. And then if you watch down on this little corner here, it shows you what the actual selected color is. But if I go up here, once I'm in eyedropper, then I can click on that, and you'll notice in that corner, the selected color changes. So I can choose pretty much any color from the photo and use that at least as a base color to work with. So that's what I'm going to be working with. I am going to be using a lot of layers today. So if you're doing digital work, you'll learn about using layers. That's one of the advantages of digital art. It gives you an ability to control and change things in a way you really can't with the traditional media. Then also, in addition to working with layers, I'm going to be using mostly today my pastel tool. Okay, and I'm going to have that set on, let's see, generally speaking, I like it on soft wax. And that seems to be the setting that works best in imitating an actual chalk pastel. Even though they have a chalk setting, the wax setting actually is closer to a real pastel feel. I will be using maybe occasionally the pencil feature if I'm going for detail. And then I'm going to be using my palette knife. Now, in other digital programs, they don't usually have a palette knife. They have what are called blenders, and that's how the palette knife functions in ArtRage. And the setting I'm going to be using for that will be Tiny Frost. You may or may not have that. If you don't have Tiny Frost, then I would go with something like Small Frost, but Tiny Frost if you have it. So those are my settings. Those are my presets. I will adjust all of those as I go. But the first thing I'm going to do, I've already created a new layer. So I have the layer that you're seeing right here. If I click on that eye, it disappears. So that is my drawing layer. And then last week we added a background color, and that's going to show up later. You'll see how that works a little later, but I'm going to keep that turned off right now. But I have added another layer, and I'm going to add a lot more as I go on. When we draw or color, we always want to work from back to front. So if we're looking at the reference picture here, then we're going to choose the back petals, and then we're going to work around toward the front. And all we're going to get done today is just the tulip. We will not have time to do the leaves or the rest of the background. We'll do those next week. But we're going to work from the back to the front, and I am going to start with this little piece, and I'm thinking that's part of that larger petal, but it's kind of split off, and it looks like this top part here has kind of curled down, and it's behind this other petal. So one of the advantages, another advantage of digital work, is you can blow it up, and I really like that because it gives me a lot better view of what I'm doing. Plus, if it's larger, my tools don't have to be quite as precise as they would if I was working with a much smaller image. So I can blow this up, and we're going to start here. But before I do that, I'm going to come down to this layer. This is the layer that has the tulip on it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust its opacity. Opacity is how light or dark, how much light is allowed to shine through. But in digital work, it really refers to just how solid the image is, I guess. And I'm going to take that down to about 50%. Okay. And I might even take that, I think I'm going to take it down a little farther than that. Let's take it down to about 35%. There we go. Because I just want it as basically a guideline to work with, because I'm going to be painting over top of it. I will eventually turn off that layer entirely, but it gives us something to work with for starters. Okay, so now I'm on layer 4. Layer 4 is simply going to be this little section. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm going to start out with my pastel tool. I'm going to shrink it down. Let me see how big a mark that's making. It's a little bit too big. I like a little smaller than that. And again, you wouldn't do this if you're working with regular media. Okay, cancel that. And let's take those back out. Okay, I got to make sure I'm on the layer I want to be on. That's the biggest mistake you can end up making with digital art, is being on the wrong layer or forgetting what layer you're on. And I'm going to come over here. If I look at this, it's kind of a dark yellow. So I'm going to go with this dark gold yellow here. Let's see, so this one's a little bit darker. And again, these were taken right from the paper. And I'm going to just come in and color. Okay, and again, depending on what you're working with, you would want to do pretty much the same thing. I'm just going to color this little section right here. Okay, and I'm going to take it down right to the bottom. Okay, that was easy enough. Now I'm going to add in this brighter color here, and this is a bright yellow, so I'm going to go with this bright yellow. This is almost a white, but we'll fix that in a bit with just an accent. For starters, I'm just going to come in and add this little bit here. And if you'll notice, mine isn't shaped exactly the same way. There's a little bit more kind of an upswing there, so I'm going to actually bring that up a little bit farther. And that's going to come down a little bit more. Okay, now I want to add in a little bit of shadowing. Shadowing, you want to be careful. You don't want to use black. Okay, if you come in and try to shadow with black, it muddies, it darkens to the point where it's just not very pretty. So whenever you're shadowing, you want to try to use a color. And since I already have this color selected, I'm going to click over here in my box, and that's what that's going to do is that's going to bring up, I'm going to move my other little windows out of the way here. It's going to bring up, take that out, my color picker, and then I can kind of adjust it a little bit. And I'm going to adjust it a little darker and just change it and make it a little bit redder. Okay, about like that. Let's see what that looks like there. Okay, let's bring this back down. And some of this is kind of done by feel. Okay, so I've got some nice shadowing here. Now you might use, if you're working with colored pencils, you might use a brown pencil, dark brown pencil, to kind of layer in some of that shading. Same if you're using pastels. Okay, now I'm going to go to my blender. I've got it set at about 14%, which means a pretty light touch. I might even shrink that down a little bit more because I don't want to. One thing with Art Rage, now I need to make it a little bigger, is if you're not careful with the blending around the edges, it tends to turn it white, and I don't really want that. Okay, so now see there, I got some kind of just some white color, and I really want that shadowing to stay in there. So I want to be careful with my blending, not to over blend. Okay, so I've got this feathering out really nicely here. Okay, now I want to come in and I want to lighten this up a little bit. I'm going to go back to my, there's my samples. They were hiding back there. I go back to my samples, and I've got kind of just an off-white here. I come in with this. Oops, I'm still on blend mode. When I get back to here, I'm going to add in this off-white to make this a little bit brighter. And I keep some of the yellow. I'm not going to completely cover that. Okay, and then just a light touch with the blender. And I might come back in and try my pencil just to see if I can get a sharper edge here. Sometimes the pencil will give me a little bit sharper edge than the pastel tool will. Okay, so that's part one. That's layer one. So now I'm going to add another layer in. I want to keep it on what I've got as layer 4 now and hit the plus sign. That's going to add me a brand new layer. Now I am drawing on something totally different than what I had. Okay, so if I go down to layer 4, turn that off, there goes that. Okay, so I'm up on layer 5. So nothing I do is going to affect this now. Okay, so now I'm going to come back in with, again, kind of a golden yellow, because this is particularly this side of this petal is very much a golden yellow type color. Move the samples down here for now. And I'm going to come back here. I'm going to make this bigger now because I've got a lot more area to cover. So I'm going to come in and just pretty strongly come in and follow that shape. Doesn't have to be perfect, and I'll tweak all of that later. Right, and I'm going to bring it down here. I come over here, and you notice here we're going to get a little bit more yellowy. So now I could switch to another color, or I can just come here, move more to a yellowish hue, and kind of turn up the brightness a little bit. And I kind of like that. I'll come in with the brighter yellow in a bit. Remember, you're not trying to make a photographic reproduction of that picture. Now, there are artists who do that, and they're amazing artists. But most of the time, you don't want to do an absolute photorealism. You want to add your own interpretation of whatever it is you're painting, because that's a lot of what art is you expressing yourself and putting yourself into it. Okay, we've got a little bit of a darker shade here, so I'm going to come back in with this darker. Okay. Remember, you'll have to adjust depending on what medium you're using. Okay, I'm going to go back here now to my blender. I'm going to turn that up a little bit, see what kind of effect I get. Yeah, I kind of like that. Okay. Now it's okay. Now see, I'm getting that white there because I'm on a different layer. So I'll have to come back in and fix that in a bit. And I'll show you an easy way to do that if you're working with Art Rage. This is a problem that is really pretty much unique to Art Rage. But I want to just get this coloring kind of blended in here. Okay, see how that pulls that away and you can see through. Usually I don't like that. Now, when I turn on my dark background, actually some of that really looks pretty nice because some of that background is going to sparkle through. But I don't want quite that much there. So I go in with my pencil and just touch that up a little bit. I could also touch it up with an airbrush tool, but I don't want to go into a different tool right now and have to explain the adjustments. I want to kind of keep it just on the pastel and on the pencil. Okay, so I do want a little bit brighter yellow, so I'm going to come in with my bright yellow and again go back to my pastel. I'm going to shrink this down somewhat and just lay in some yellow color just to get a little bit more color contrast here. Okay, so I might even throw a little bit over here because you notice we do have some light shining here, so I want to get a little bit of that. I'm going to even go in with some of this really bright yellow. And I come back with my blender, maybe soften those edges a little bit. Okay, so we've done our second petal. Okay, so now it's time. Let me come back out. Okay, now I've got here what is kind of a pretty strong contrast. And what I'm going to do is one thing you can do with a layer, and I'm going to do it with this one because I want to try to blend these together because this is all part of one petal here. And when they're on separate layers, I can't do much blending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on layer 4, which is the big one, and I'm going to merge that layer down, which now has combined those two. So now I can work them together and do a little bit better blending job here. I want to shrink that down a little bit. Just want to kind of soften the edges here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to come up here, and I do want to um, make sure that I am, you know what I did? I made a mistake. So I'm going to show you when you make a mistake, how to fix it digitally. And this is not something, I actually merged the wrong layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here to undo. I'm going to just take out what I just did, and that should take out that merge here. Let's see. It's not, there it is. Okay. I took it out. Okay. What I want is layer 5 and layer 4 to merge. And that should be, that's what I was trying to do in the first place. Okay, that's a great advantage of digital again, because you make a mistake, you can fix it. And you can fix it too with regular media. It's just fixing in a different way. Okay, so, all right, now let's move this over a bit. Okay, we're going to come to this petal now, which is going to be here, and it's going to come down here because this little petal actually is in front of it. Okay, so I'm going to add another layer, layer number 5, and you notice the colors are pretty similar. I'm going to actually go with my darker because I want to differentiate them for a little bit. I'm going to come in here. Remember, I'm on a different layer. And one of the cool things that you can do with digital is if a layer is in the back, I'm going to overlap here and show you what I mean. If a layer is in the back, I can actually pick this layer up, move it to where it's behind, and now as I color, it colors behind that other petal. That's another reason I really like using layers like this, okay? Because it gives you a level of control that you just don't have typically with other types of media. Okay, so we have now put in a base color, okay? And that's this little area down here. I'm going to add some lighter yellow in, okay? And we're on the dark side of the tulip. The light is hitting from the right, but you'll notice that there is a little bit of highlighting right up there at the top, and that's where the light is going over top and just hitting that. So we want to make sure we get some of that, okay? Always observe. That's one of the things that really has made a difference in me over the years doing art. Okay, I'm going to my really bright off-white. When I started doing art, I became much more observant. When I, used to be when I would look at a bunch of trees off in the distance, I saw a bunch of trees off in the distance. Now I see all sorts of different shades of green. Going back to blend now. Okay, just want to soften the edges. I'm not going to try to make a perfect blend. Remember, if I get too close to the edge of that little layer area, it's going to goof up a bit. So I want to try to avoid that. I also want to sculpt a little bit, okay, because this is really rough through here. So I want to kind of shape that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my eraser tool, and my presets, I have several different kinds of erasers. A kneaded eraser and soft eraser are things that I often use, but right now for sculpting, I want either hard edge or instant erase. I'm going to go with instant erase, and I'm going to shrink this way down because all I want to do is kind of trim trim the edge there and make it look a little bit more shapely. Not quite so rough. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is just right on this edge, I'm going to come in with a little bit of dark brown, very little. In fact, I'm going to use the pencil tool and just kind of come in here very lightly, not putting a lot of pressure on. And if you were using colored pencils, this is how you would do it. But I want to just come in and I just want to add a little bit of differentiation there so you can see that this is separate, because we're using a lot of the same colors here and we want to separate that out. I'm not even going to use my blender tool right now. I might later come back into that. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, now you would think I would go to this one, but I'm actually going to come over to this petal. Okay, and we really have a section that's kind of in behind, and then we have this larger petal here. So I'm going to make sure I'm on layer 4. Okay, this is layer 4 is in the back, and then I'm going to add another layer. Okay, so this is layer 6. I'm going to come in with, again, my base coat of yellow, kind of golden yellow. Let's see, I'm using my pastel tool. It's a little bit small. Let's make that a little larger. We can get a little bit more coverage here. Now, if I were working slowly with lots of extra time, I would probably do this section on a layer by itself. But we're getting near the end of our time together, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep those on the same layer. I come in here with the brighter yellow. And I'm actually going to just overlap here and take this down here like this. And then I'm going to come in, remember, see all this highlighting here. Okay, so I'm going to come in, I'm going to highlight right down that side there. And I'm going to bring some of that highlight across because you can see it's kind of coming in almost ripples is what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to just come down here, bring that up a little bit more, bring that across. And then we do have a little darker area, so I'm going to bring in some of that. And then this gets really dark down here. I'm going to go down there. Okay, up in here, okay, it tends to get a little bit brighter near the top. So I'm going to come in with a little bit more brightness there. And then I'm going to come in again with my real bright right up here. Okay, and then my blender tool is going to just come in and soften some of that. If you're using pastels, you might even be using your finger to blend this part. And then I'm going to come over here real quick and do this. Okay, and then I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to come in with a dark brown. Let's make it even a little bit darker. And just right here, I just put this line, not putting a lot of pressure at all, but I want to differentiate that little section of a petal there. And I'm actually going to do that here too. And then I'm going to come in with that brighter bring that around like that. Okay, and let's go back to this a little bit. Okay, now got one more petal to do. I'm going to do it really quickly. I'm going to add one more layer. However, this layer is going to actually, I'm going to move it down. So it will be underneath this layer. And that way, as I lay in my color, it's going to just go right over there. Make this bigger so I can do this quickly. We're just about out of time. Well, actually, we are out of time, but I'm going a little bit over today. Okay, going to just come around. Let's get all of this. I want to finish the tulip at least before next week. Then next week we will do the leaves and maybe the background if we have enough time. Okay, so we've got the basic petal in. We're going to come back now with a brighter color. Actually go with our bright yellow, not super bright yellow, but I'm going to come in. I want to hit the edges here. I'm going to have to come back obviously and highlight these edges a little bit more to separate them from the petal in the back. Down this way. Okay, we've got some really bright right up here. I'm going to lay in some of that really bright area. And I'm going to actually bring some of that down here on the side. I'm going to take some of the darker brown. Well, let's see. I might be able to work with that. Let me see what happens. Okay, and I'm going to go back to my blender. I'm going to crank that up a little bit for this area here. If I can get it to blend in a little bit better. Remember, I got to be really careful as I get close to the edge. I don't want to get too much of the white that comes when the edges are separated. Okay, I'm just going to come around, soften that a little bit. I'm going to pull this up so we have it a little bit farther. And then I'm going to use my pencil tool, and I'm going to actually just kind of come in right here, add a little bit of contrast. Come back to my blender. I'll make this really, really small. Just so we get some shadowing there. And I'm going to feather it out. And I can't feather any of that because that's all on a different layer. Okay, so let me shrink that down. And let's turn on our dark background. Okay, now I might come back in. I'm not going to do it today because we're just about out of time, but I might come back in on this layer here and kind of soften this a little bit, blend a little bit. little bit of sparkle that's coming through from the back of the background I kind of like, so I'm going to probably leave that. Um, but I'll go back and do more touch up down the line. I'm really pretty happy with how that looks right now. So I hope you will do yours in whatever way you want to. Whatever medium you're using, go ahead and have fun with it. Remember, that's rule number one in art: have fun. If you're not having fun, then there's something wrong. So have a good time. Enjoy the process. Next week, we're going to do the stem and the leaves, and maybe the background if we have time. And I think we will, because the leaves and stem are pretty easy to do. They're not quite as complex as the petals were. Have a wonderful week. I have enjoyed being with you today. I hope you've enjoyed this class. I'm Jim Pence with See the Light. And remember, keep drawing and always have fun.